Good morning, everyone. This is a big adventure for both Tom and I. This is the first time that I've done such a large Zoom event with people that I don't necessarily know. We've been doing a lot of Zoom staff meetings, but this is quite of a different level. And I've also been hoping that we could have Tom Turkington talk to us for some time, and I'm glad that this morning is finally the time that it can happen. It's really a delight to be here, and I'm glad that you're all here. So let me just tell you a little bit about what was the beginnings of this program, and that is Postcards from Falmouth, which is a special local history project of the Falmouth Public Library that is based upon our historical postcard collection of noted buildings, landmarks, and locations within the town of Falmouth. Introduced in 1869 as a way of sending a simple message, postcards quickly evolved beyond their practical purpose to become the universal souvenir that brightens everyone's mailboxes. And I have to say, one of the things we did when we were closed, we would send a lot of our patrons postcards, which was people were delighted with. However, postcards also provide us with rare glimpses into the past and serve as a way of documenting history. That is why we jumped at the chance when we saw the opportunity for a grant to develop projects that use historical documents, such as our historical postcard collection, to discover unknown facts and stories about Falmouth during days gone by. After all, to collect, preserve, and share such resources is what the Falmouth Public Library has been doing since 1792. Postcards from Falmouth has been made possible through a Library Services and Technology Act grant, which is administered through the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. This series of talks is also made possible thanks to the Falmouth Public Library trustees and, of course, FCTV. And we hope by the end of this series that those of you listening will be inspired to look at our postcard collections and share your memories of Falmouth. And somebody who has a lot of memories of Falmouth is Tom Turkington. And I have to say, I have been delighted reading the book, and I think you will be as well. Tom did write a memoir of his childhood in Falmouth, which is a revelation in so many ways for those of us. I've been here 30 years and I still learn lots of things from his book. Before I forget, A Boyhood of Little Drama. And there will be time for questions at the end, which you can type into the chat. So without further ado, although I will say I particularly, Tom, liked all the information about Panis silversmiths. I have a Panis ring right here on my finger, and Matt Person, with whom I live, remembers this, has many of the same memories you have of Panis. So really a treat to read about Panis and your relationship with Panis silversmiths. For those of you that don't know Panis, read the book if he doesn't mention it this morning. So I will now give over the screen to Tom Turkington.
Thanks, Jill, for that nice introduction after a long, awkward wait, but that's Zoom for you. Just myself, I was born in Falmouth in 1949 and spent most of the first 18 years of my life there. I was there for another 15 years as a young adult. I live in New Hampshire now. The book was my entry to this program. But you got to understand, the book is not, there was no research. Everything in here, just I drew it from my memory bank. And surprisingly enough, people have looked and said, hey, there's a lot of details that, how do you remember those things? And so accurately, and I guess I just have a mind that does that sort of thing. It came about because I found as I actually wrote it 4 or 5 years ago. I found as I was getting into my 50s and 60s that I sort of developed an interest in my parents' history, my grandparents, and what were they like when they were kids, and what was the world like around them, what did they do with their time and all that. And of course, they weren't around to tell me. And it occurred to me that probably my kids someday would get into their 50s and 60s, and they would begin to develop the same interest about me, and I wouldn't be around to tell them. So I put it down in a book, and my own kids in 30 or 40 years can refer back and know a little bit more about where they came from. It is a memoir, so it's not about Falmouth per se, it's about me. Memoirs are like that. But of course, because I was in Falmouth, people, places, events, things that were going on in Falmouth between in the 50s and 60s are scattered throughout the book. This project, as Jill was saying, sort of sprang forth from postcards, old postcards. And I don't have any postcards here as props, but the way I'm going to approach this is to just sort of imagine what might be on a postcard and then ruminate a little bit about that thing that could have been on a postcard and do some readings from the book that relate to it. One of the most photographed places in Falmouth is probably Main Street. And when I'm back in Falmouth, which I often am, it's kind of fun to go down Main Street and look. And of course, there's been massive turnover, as there always has been. But in some respects, hasn't changed too much. Main Street, when I was a kid, yeah, you could get auto parts there. You could get your photos developed at Orton's Photo Shop. You could, you could go to a movie. There were 2 movie theaters on Main Street. Okay, none of those are there anymore, but pretty much what you have now is places to eat and places to buy clothes and gifts. And really, 50 years ago, there were plenty of places to eat. Most of them were lunch counters at J.J. Newberry's and at the Rexall Drugs and at the Sandbar. And all up and down Main Street, there were places to eat, but they were fast food, and it wasn't junk food. It was fast because you'd go in, you sit down, Ralph Sullivan would come over and say, "What do you want?" Tell him a ham and cheese sandwich, and 2 minutes later, there it was in front of you. So now we have high-end restaurants instead. Okay, that says something about the economy. And one of the other things that you used to do on Main Street that you don't do anymore is you go shopping for your food. And there's a little something in my book about food shopping. One indicator of the growth and modernization of Falmouth has been the evolution of the food stores. When I was little and we lived on Mill Road, the closest thing to a supermarket in town was the A&P on Main Street. It was right next to Town Hall, which was raised in the 60s to make way for a parking lot and a nice little park. That's Peg Noonan Park. There were other food stores besides the A&P, SS Pierce, for example, but the A&P was about it for general food shopping. It was a little bit larger, though not nearly as neat and clean as a standard convenience store today. There were maybe 4 or 5 aisles, half the width and 1/3 the length of what we're used to now. If you were over by the butcher shop, the smell all around was of meat getting old. By the checkout lines, they kept the coffee grinders, very large machines considering their simple function. And that whole end of the store smelled of ground up 8 o'clock coffee, which never got swept up. My lingering impression of a trip to the A&P with Mom in my early years is one of having to deal with inconvenience. No place to park, hard walking on a badly ruptured sidewalk, difficulty opening the door, sticking wheels on the shopping cart, traffic jams throughout the store, piles of merchandise stacked in the way, long waits in line. But the reward was to watch, hear, and smell the coffee grinder at work. Oh, there's more. I'm talking about the evolution of Falmouth. I'm not just reminiscing on going to the A&P when I was a kid. Now comes the evolution. First National Stores was the first chain to offer shopping relief to the beleaguered Falmouth housewife. They opened up a snazzy new supermarket at the foot of Shore Street, either just before or just after we moved back to town. It had a parking lot, automatic doors, wide aisles, new carts, and sales and promotions. Of course, it was an instant success, which was noted by the Stop and Shop chain, which acted quickly and radically. They got away from Main Street and onto some vacant acreage at Heights Corner, where they opened up a store that was bigger yet, and had a modernistic arched roof and a huge parking lot and a few other little stores attached and reachable by a covered walkway. And they called it Falmouth Plaza. Trying not to be outdone, but being outdone nonetheless, the A&P put up a new store on a vacant lot just off Main Street. It was a whole lot bigger, cleaner, and more amenable than their outworn old place, which became a stationery store. But not as much as the new Stop and Shop or even bigger supermarket that was later to come to the Jones Road intersection. And most disastrous of all, the fools built it on Scranton Avenue. There it remained for decades, poorly managed, lightly patronized, constantly emblematic of the decline of the great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. Well, if you were to buy a modern day postcard, you wouldn't have to look long to find one of Falmouth Harbor. Now, Falmouth Harbor was once Deacon's Pond. And as I understand it, Deacon's Pond was not open to the sound. It was landlocked. And if you were driving down Clinton Avenue towards the Heights, you get to where the Clam Shack is now, and you just kept right on going. And the next thing you know, you were heading up into Falmouth Heights. Of course, this was pretty much before automobiles existed. And I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but I would say the town realized that there were a lot of rich people now starting to move into town during the summer, and they had pleasure craft, and the old stone dock at the foot of Shore Street was pretty much a failure. And so it was decided to open up Deacon's Pond, dredge it, and make a harbor out of it. At the time I lived there, Scranton Avenue was practically a wasteland. And I don't know why. It was very close to the center of town. But Scranton Avenue, which paralleled right along the side of the harbor, there was nothing there. If you were heading up from Main Street towards the mouth of the harbor, it was all field on your right. There was a carnival there every summer. Could have had the Barnstable County Fair there. There was that much open space. You got to Queen Street, still nothing, still just fields. And then 3/4 of the way down Scranton Avenue, it was bing, 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 bing. There were 4 or 5 very modest, kind of weather-beaten homes in a row. And then again, nothing until you got to the mouth of the harbor. I'm not sure why Scranton Avenue was such a pariah in town, but hardly anybody lived there. But there was something special about Scranton Avenue. I'm going to tell you about it. We moved there in June of '58. This was not the first time the Turkingtons took up residence on Scranton Avenue. The uninhabited wasteland between us and Main Street had been, for one brief shining moment in the late '40s, the most densely populated neighborhood in the whole town. Whatever federal agency came into being for the purpose of providing cheap housing for returning veterans built a colony of concrete block row buildings there, dwellings. When Mom and Dad and baby Eric first moved to town from upstate New York, that's where they lived. We did not coddle our young veterans. Life here was rather spare, and the grateful residents moved out as soon as they could find something better, which in our case was the house on Fairview Avenue, just down the street, my first home. The block dwellings were demolished when the need for them passed, but one dominant structure remains until the early '60s. It consisted of one very large room with a couple of little ones at one end. I'm guessing now, but it may have served as a play and gathering place for the residents. So here were rows of apartment-style dwelling units with a community recreation building, open space all around, and an unobstructed view of the harbor. Dig it, a rock-bottom, low-budget, disposable development for penniless veterans served as the model for the vacation communities for the bourgeoisie that now infest practically every harborfront site in New England and beyond. Any pictures taken of Surf Drive? Surf Drive was my beach, and I think was the first widely used public beach in Falmouth, the first beach that was treated as such, with parking lot and bathhouse and snack bar and lifeguards and all that. I lived about a mile away, and I used to go there quite regularly during the summertime. That's where the old stone dock was. And you look at the old stone dock now, and it's just a pile of rocks that have been gradually settling into the sea. But at one time it was built to be kind of the original Falmouth Harbor. People would unload there and come in little boats and unload on the dock, and then ship the stuff down Shore Street to center of town, and other stuff would get shipped back. I don't think it ever worked out very well. Just to look at it, you see it just wasn't that big. And it certainly wasn't that stable because it had to be rebuilt a couple of times. But it was my beach, and it was a very popular beach in those days. And one of its most popular features and enjoyable ones was the Raft. Not there anymore, hasn't been there in a long time. I spent a lot of summer days hanging out at Surf Drive Beach, which was a public beach a mile from home. The town had a multifaceted raft about 50 yards offshore that offered all kinds of opportunities for fun. It had a diving board just a few feet above the water, a platform about 6 feet up, and another about 10 feet up. And it had a long slide with a shiny metal surface that had a couple of burrs on it that you had to watch out for, or you'd rip your bathing suit on the way down, if not your flesh. It floated on two massive pontoons, which, as long as they stayed watertight, kept the raft a foot above the water. This allowed daredevil boys to dive off the raft, swim under a pontoon, and come up for air under the raft. We played a lot of tag on that raft. There were all sorts of tricky, extremely hazardous ways to tag someone if you were it. One was to jump off the high platform and tag a kid standing on the raft as you went by, then swim under the pontoons and get away. This meant that you'd be jumping from 10 feet up, missing the edge of the raft by inches, then going underwater and not being seen again for a while. The beach committee provided this raft for the amusement of their beachgoers, with never a thought for liability. Accidents? That's what lifeguards were for. Now, it's hard to photograph BBs Woods, but BBs Woods has become, if anything, an ever more important part of center of town. There were two mansions up there. There is one remaining that has been grandly and beautifully overdone, redone, fixed up, made into its original state. That would be Highfield. It was also Tanglewood, and these were the mansions that were owned by the BBs, who bought really just about all the land between the railroad tracks, the bike path, and Sippowisset Road, east to west. North to south, pretty much Sippowisset Road, almost down to Quissit. Huge parcel of land. In my time as a kid, some sections of that all BBs Woods were kind of sold off, I think. Green Gate became one of them, one development, and Marvin Gardens, Marvin Circle became another. There was still a huge parcel of land out there that, as of late 60s, was about to be developed. It was very close to being sold to some people who were going to just build more green gates. And then J.K. Lilly, great benefactor of Falmouth, bought the whole place and gave most of it to the town. And the town has since put in nice wide trails for walking, and it's become a very popular place for walkers, hikers, joggers, people with dogs. It's a wonderful asset, of course. And the crown jewel in BBs Woods is the punch bowl, which is the kettle hole, a large pond, kind of way out in, back then it was out in the middle of nowhere. I think a lot of most growing boys in town knew where to find it, could direct you to it, but there were just little beaten paths. It was very easy to get lost in there, and but the punch bowl was a real attraction. And I had an episode there. I had many episodes there. There was one episode in particular that stuck in my mind all these years later. Mark Denman and I hiked up into BBs Woods fairly often, not always with a trip to the punch bowl in mind, but we usually wound up there at some point. Our main activities were skinny dipping, smoking cigarettes when we could procure them, catching and releasing bullfrogs, throwing rocks, making funny sounds, and listening for the echoes. One fine June afternoon, we were swimming in the middle of the pond when we heard shouts from the little rocky landing at the foot of the trail. "Denman! Turkington!" We looked over and saw Donnie Kudo and Jimmy Carey, two kids a couple of years older than us, standing on the rocks. "We've got your clothes!" And so they did. By the time we got out of the water, they had a long head start in all of our duds, shoes included. And we had that empty feeling that befalls all of us from time to time, usually when we least expect it. This time I'm really screwed. Walking unclothed through the woods wasn't the problem. We were unlikely to encounter anybody there. The problem was, what happened when the woods end? Getting to Mark's house was our only viable option, as he lived pretty close to the edge of the woods. Trouble was, once we were out in the open, we would have to cross the railroad tracks, run down a short, unoccupied dirt road, then get to the other side of Palmer Avenue, which was Route 28, which was the busiest road in town. However, we got through all that, we then would have to cut through a neighbor's yard to get to the little wooded area surrounding the Denmans. And then what? "Hi, Mom, I'm home and I'm stark naked. So is Tom." Well, we had plenty of time to think all this through, and what we came up with was we'd skulk through the backyards of some of the homes this side of Palmer Avenue, looking for laundry we could steal from somebody's clothesline to cover ourselves up with. If we couldn't find any, which we probably wouldn't, we'd crouch in the bushes beside Route 28 in broad daylight in a heavily populated section of town, hoping to remain unseen until there was a break in the traffic. Then we'd streak across the road, through the neighbor's yard to Mark's house, get some clothes on, and catch hell. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the best we could do. Then, just a while before the end of the trail, we saw something up in the branches. A pair of underpants. And look over there, a shirt. And a pair of sneakers in the middle of the trail. What good guys. Thanks, Donnie. Thanks, Jimmy. Sorry about all those awful things we said about you hiking back from the punch bowl. It's truly amazing how, when a distressing situation appears to be heading for the worst, and for some reason the worst doesn't come to pass, we not only are grateful for whatever prevented the worst from happening, but wholly unresentful of whoever created the distressing situation in the first place. Relief is surely one of life's most rewarding feelings. Falmouth managed to cluster all its schools right in the center of the village. First there was Lawrence Academy, then that became Lawrence High School, next to the library, right on Main Street. And that got too big, well, right across what is now Bates Road from the high school was the village school, elementary school, now the Margaret A. Mullen School. Right over there was the Hall School, which was for 5th and 6th graders. And then when it came time to build a new high school, they just went across Shibrick's Pond, built a really fine new high school. I think this was 1953. And to my mind, that building, now called the Lawrence School and junior high school, was the best school building this town ever had. And I hope it's there forever. I spent 6 years there. I was in the last class. It was built as a 7th through 12. And of course, within not very many years after it was built, it was overcrowded. And so they built a middle school over on Morse Pond. So I was in the last class that started in 7th grade and stayed there through 12th grade. It's a very functional building, very attractive building. And I probably didn't feel so at the time, but now that I look back on it, I realized that most of my teachers there were really very good. I had at least one real loser of a teacher, and that fellow gets some play in my book here. But most of them were really good. Miss Buchanan, I locked horns with her a lot, but she was a fine teacher. Jim Kinney, Earl Mills through the athletic department and phys ed. These are people I have a lot to say about. And I can't help thinking back on Pat Mormon. She was my sophomore year English teacher. She was very much one of a kind. Craggy of feature and lean of build, she had an outsized personality and was the tallest woman, nay, even the tallest person in the school. Her nickname among the kids was Moose. She was close friends, or perhaps shared a home with, a secretarial teacher, Miss Ogden, who was the shortest. Together they looked like Mutt and Jeff. Like most staff members in the English department, Miss Mormon had an undisguised love of the language and its greatest classic works. Her personal predilection was for grammar and syntax. We spent quite a bit of time diagramming sentences in her classroom, and if there was within a kid the slightest potential interest in this highly analytic activity, as there was in me, Miss Mormon could kindle it. She could get very animated trying to get across to us the subtleties of a complicated sentence. What really distinguished Miss Mormon's class, aside from the total immersion in grammar, was her readiness to put the lesson aside and expound upon subjects unrelated to our work. Prejudice, politics, human foibles, life's ironies. She didn't so much engender discussion as inform us of her views and passions. She did so with vigor, and then it was back to the lesson. She was a tough grader and not very understanding of excuses. But after many years at LHS, she still got a kick out of the kids and didn't hide that fact. Like most of our teachers, she had her moments of cluelessness concerning the ways of 15-year-olds. I wonder if there are any teachers left who still instruct a room full of silly boys that an abrupt exclamation is properly termed an ejaculation. Not many, I bet. Together with my parents and a few others, she was on the team that left me with a great appreciation for proper, artful use of English and low tolerance for those who care not to use it correctly. When I'm confronted with a professionally butchered piece of writing, as happens more and more frequently as I age, I can't help thinking or saying, this person just wasn't paying attention in English class. It's Miss Mormon's class, I think of then. Another thing about Lawrence was why was it Lawrence? I mean, it was Falmouth. It was the public high school in Falmouth. Barnstable High School, Bourne High School. Sandwich High School. Hey, every town you go to, town has a high school, supports the high school. High school is named after that town. Except in Falmouth, it was Lawrence. And I didn't really mind that, but I was on an athletic team that had an extraordinary amount of success. We'd go to big track meets, and a lot of us performed high and placed very high in championship events. Well, 1/3 of the people watching would think that we were from the city of Lawrence. Oh, no wonder they're good. They're a big city. They got a lot of kids to draw from. And about 1/3 of the people thought we were some hotshot prep school down in Falmouth. Yeah, no wonder they're good. They can recruit from all over. And then the rest of the people knew that we were the public high school in Falmouth. Well, we were proud of our town. We were pleased to be from Falmouth, and it kind of irked us that most people thought we were not what we actually were. But this goes back to, again, correct me if I'm wrong. Nobody's out there to correct me. So 1840s, maybe 1850s, there was a Mr. Lawrence. Had a lot of money, big man in town, and offered the town a substantial piece of money to build an academy, sort of the first secondary school in Falmouth. And well, thrifty Cape Codders were only too happy to take him up on his offer. So the only obligation was they had to name it after him. So that was the first Lawrence Academy, which I believe to be now the building that is the Chamber of Commerce off of Main Street. Town grew, number of high school kids going to high school grew, so they built a new building, but the name came with it. And that building was bursting at the seams after a while, so they built a new high school, and the name came with it. Finally, in I think it was 73, they built that new high school out on Gifford Street and decided to call it Falmouth High School. Any true history of Falmouth, any comprehensive history of Falmouth, especially mid-century Falmouth, would not be complete unless it had some material on the track teams at the high school. There's a little bit of self-interest here. I was involved with running sports in 2 different ways. One as a runner in high school, extremely dedicated and pretty successful one. And then as a coach, I coached cross country at Falmouth for 13 years later on, and was successful and also lucky. But there was through the 60s, 70s, 80s, Falmouth running sports at the high school were known statewide for excellence. There was Jim Calparis had the track teams in the 60s. John Carroll started up the girls track and had extraordinary success through the 70s. I was coaching cross country in the 80s. But it all started with Calpe. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about it. Now about Calpe. Some new kids, including myself at one time, might call him Mr. Calparis. And there were a few ass-kissers who'd call him Coach, but to everyone else, he was Calpe. He bore a considerable resemblance to Groucho Marx, from the hustling gait bent slightly at the waist, to the mischievous dancing eyebrows, to the ever-present cigar, to the offhand commentary from the corner of the mouth, to the vague but usually accurate sense you got when he talked to you, that you were being conned, you knew not how. He was an operator who saw more clearly than most that if everybody follows all the rules to the letter all the time, Nothing worthwhile will ever happen. Of course, he was not all things to all people. There were those who felt he came up a mite short in the teaching of science, which was his primary job description. He was probably an energetic, knowledgeable instructor, but he could be distracted with ease. Many is the time I'd wander off from a study hall or a lunch break or another class with a teammate to drop in on Calpy. Seeing us at the door, he would assign someone to monitor the class while we all went into the adjoining audiovisual storage room to screw spikes into racing shoes or discuss the day's workout or plot strategy for the Dartmouth meet. There was a rare, enlivening mix of humor, gravity, and intensity of purpose in dealing with Calpy and participating on his teams. He became a coach of runners a year after the LHS cross-country program was successfully begun under Don Jocelyn, who moved on after that inaugural 1960 season. The team was then made up largely of underprivileged Black kids who so often went through 4 years of high school without ever tasting success in a school-related endeavor. The principal, Mr. Marshall, wanted to see the program continue after Jocelyn left, and presciently recognized Calpy as a good man to take it over, so he asked him if he would, and he did. Calpy knew nothing about distance running when he took over the cross-country team, and nothing about track events when he subsequently took over the track teams, but he started winning state titles right away. As a coach, he did not take an authoritarian stance, to put it mildly. I don't believe he ever took attendance. Why bother? Attendance was not required. He never said you had to be there. He established an atmosphere that made you want to be there. He never made athletes do the work. He made them want to do the work. What a difference. It wasn't possible to rebel against the requirements of team membership or the demands of the coach because there weren't any. He gave people a whole lot of leeway and encouraged an atmosphere in which every kid felt he could be himself and achieve respect for it, first from the coach and by extension from his teammates. He was a master at reading an individual and figuring out what he was in it for. And this applied to the adult world as well as the track team. In later years, when he was dealing with the broader spectrum than sports, people often came to him asking for something. His first inclination was to see to it that they got it. If that couldn't be done, he'd try to persuade them that they really didn't want it. If that failed, he'd convince them that they already had it. It didn't often need to go further than that. So looking at my watch here, and I could go on. By the way, I ought to warn you, if you have an interest in this book, I tell you for one thing, it's not out there on the bookshelves at the bookstores, which aren't open anyway. I believe it's still available on Amazon. If you want to get a copy, that's the place to go. Most of the second half of the book, I enter Lawrence High School as a freshman about midway through the book. And to be honest with you, from then on, the narrative is very heavy on the track. The book's about me. And track was very important to me all through high school. I was extremely dedicated, and it was my main focus. So, of course, the second half of the book is full of track stuff. I find a lot of my memories of track, some pathos, some sorrow, some joys, some humor. So, you know, the narrative continues, but a lot of it's about track. Be warned. But I also mention Cuban Missile Crisis, assassination of JFK, nuclear test bans, all the cultural and world impact events that were going on that I recall. A lot of them are in here because I'm not just talking about, because these things affected me. These things gave me something to think about and to wonder about, so it goes into my book. There's one here that I'm going to finish up with. It has nothing to do with postcards, very little to do with Falmouth. I have a pretty long section here about being a paper boy, delivering the Falmouth Enterprise to my customers. But I close it off with, there was a curious little advertisement that regularly appeared in a quiet corner of the Enterprise. It read as follows: "Are you having a problem with alcohol? Do you want to do something about it? Call KI8, ding, 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 ding." That was it. I wasn't sure what to make of it, and apparently worldlier minds than mine weren't either. The New Yorker frequently lifted published items or quotations that were considered so peculiar or amusing that they merited reprinting as space fillers at the end of an article in that venerable weekly. One day, I ran across that familiar item from the Enterprise while leafing through the magazine in search of humor. The notion of admitting to having a problem with alcohol and of deciding to do something about it was a laughing matter to the editors of the New Yorker. It's funny, we talk about history, we talk about events of the past, and very often it's just little items like that that you'd hardly ever think of that really highlight major cultural changes from one generation to another, from one decade to another. And here, back in 1960, the idea of wanting to do something about drinking too much was just, who would do that? But there it was. So I'm going to call myself done here. Boy, I could keep going through this. It's worth writing a book if for no other reason than that you'll love every word. I can go back and reread this every month for the rest of my life and still enjoy it. I wish I could do that with other books, but I can't. I'm going to close with a little bit of an observation that was originally that was passed to me by my brother Eric, and I think this might warm the cockles of the heart of any librarian anywhere. Long after the cloud has been hacked to death, and our tweets and blogs and postings and e-titles have vanished in obsolescence, we'll still have the books. Thank you. If you have any questions, I should have mentioned this earlier. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to make, please, I think you're in contact with Jill. She will be in contact, she is in contact with me, and let her know. Thanks for joining in.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was great, and so many really delightful stories. If anybody does have a question that they'd like to ask Tom right now or a comment, you can just open up your chat and I will read him the question if you have something. I want to also mention that I loved hearing the bit again about Clinton Avenue, because I think about Clinton Avenue all the time and how it just ends and then picks up in Falmouth Heights, and how I would love to have, like, we should do something to make them connect again. We should have, you know, a bridge, or we should have little boats that go across there or something, because it seems like it must have been such a different town when Clinton Ave went right through, and the people who live downtown would have had such great access to the Falmouth Heights beaches. So yeah,
except they would have had to go up Scranton Avenue, and nobody went up Scranton Avenue for any reason.
Well, and that too is really fascinating, that Scranton Avenue, it was, you know, just not there. It was a place that wasn't there. And the stuff about the grocery stores is great. I mean, it's just so delightful to hear about what the town was like at that moment in time. And we're actually, the fellow that's going to be talking tomorrow as part of this series, Gus Woodmeyer, has written a book called The Belvedere Plain Revisited, And he talks also about Clinton Ave and how things again sort of developed. And it will be very interesting, I think, to hear that talk as well. It does not look like anybody has any questions at this moment in time, but I am really delighted to have had you finally come to the library, if only virtually. I hope next time when you're in Falmouth, you'll stop by the library and say hello. We reopened to the public yesterday, so feel free to stop by. It was a real pleasure to have you talk about your memories of Falmouth, and a great addition to this series of talks that we're doing. So, and thank to all of you that have shown up today for this. We really appreciate it. And thank you to FCTV for making this all possible in terms of making this TV part work. It is, again, our first time doing something quite of this level, so we really look forward to it. A pleasure, Tom, to hear you talk, and I hope that you all will take a look at his book, which of course the library has copies of, as well as the postcard collections. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Jill. So sorry to have put you on edge at 9:55 this morning when I wasn't around, but it worked out fine, and this is fun for me too.
That's great. It did indeed work out. We're delighted. Thank you again, and we hope some of us who join you some of you here will be able to join tomorrow for Gus Widmeyer's talk, and then we have a third one coming up on Thursday, which is Mary L. Martin, who is actually the author and owner of the world's largest postcard shop, and has just come out with a new book about collecting postcards. In fact, she's written many, many books about collecting postcards. So that will be sort of a different angle this week, is the postcards angle. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Tom.
Checking out. Thanks, Jill.